A rock star, a handful of 20-somethings, and a high schooler armed with samurai swords. Sounds like an anime plot, right? But this was the real-life hijacking of Japan Airlines Flight 351. What started as a routine domestic flight in 1970 turned into one of the most bizarre and high-stakes hijackings ever. We're talking revolutionaries, 3 governments, and a twist no one could have predicted. Trust me, you won't want to miss this ride. It gets absolutely wild. March 31st, 1970, started like any other day for the passengers on Japan Airlines Flight 351. The Boeing 727, en route from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Fukuoka with 122 passengers, was about to take a shocking turn. Among the travelers were a rock star from Hadaka no Rarizu and a high-ranking Pepsi executive, but none knew their flight would become a nightmare. As the plane cruised at 31,000 feet, a 27-year-old named Takamaro Tamiya stood up and declared he was hijacking the plane. Hijackings were unsettling in 1970, but the situation escalated when Tamiya brandished a samurai sword. Tamiya wasn't alone. His accomplices, young university students from Tokyo and Kyoto, some as young as 16, joined the chaos with samurai swords, pistols, and homemade pipe bombs. Oh, and that rock star? He was part of the hijacker crew, adding an unexpected twist to the ordeal. Who were the hijackers? Let's talk about these hijackers for a minute. They weren't some fringe group of thugs. They were part of the Red Army faction, a militant communist organization born out of Japan's radical left-wing student movements in the 1960s. During that era, Japan, like many other countries, saw waves of political unrest. Students were protesting everything from government policies to the U.S. military presence in Japan. The Red Army faction, led by intellectuals who believed in the revolutionary ideals of Marx and Lenin, decided that peaceful protest wasn't enough. They turned to violence, and they weren't shy about it. They believed that dramatic acts, like hijacking a plane, would inspire others to rise up against Japan's capitalist system. Their plan? To divert the plane to Cuba, which they viewed as a revolutionary utopia. They thought Cuba, under Fidel Castro, could be their safe haven, a place where they could regroup and continue their fight. Also hope youth will join them, looking at how heroic they acted. Takamaro Tamiya was a key figure in this movement. Just like the others, he believed that violence was justified in the pursuit of revolution. And on this day, he and his comrades were determined to make a statement that Japan and the world couldn't ignore. The hijacking begins. As the hijackers force their way into the cockpit, the pilots frantically radio for help. Soon, the hijackers have complete control, and the rest of the students start tying the male passengers to their seats under Tamiya's orders. With the cockpit breached and the pilots restrained, these so-called samurai hijackers now control Japan Airlines Flight 351. It's almost unbelievable that 1970s airline security allowed swords, pistols, and pipe bombs on board. But that was the reality. The hijackers' goal was to fly to Havana, Cuba, to join revolutionary Fidel Castro and receive military training. They planned to use this as a stepping stone for a revolutionary war back in Japan, hoping to spark a rebellion across Asia. Unfortunately for them, the Boeing 727 they hijacked wasn't built for long-haul flights across the Pacific. Even with the pilots' help, the plane couldn't reach Cuba without refueling. The Cold War also made crossing borders a tricky endeavor. When the pilots explained this, the hijackers were stunned. Scrambling for a plan B, they decided to divert to Pyongyang, North Korea. With fuel running low, they also had to consider landing in Fukuoka, but only on their terms. Negotiations begin. Back in Japan, chaos ensued as news of the hijacking reached the Ministry of Transport. Vice Minister Shinjiro Yamamura was thrust into crisis mode, handling Japan's first ever plane hijacking. The nation was horrified, and the media frenzy only added to the panic. By 9 a.m., Flight 351 had landed at Fukuoka Airport, met with a media frenzy and heavy police presence. With 129 hostages on board, the hijackers, led by Tamiya, threatened to kill if their demands weren't met. After tense negotiations, they agreed to release 23 passengers in exchange for more fuel. Scrapping their initial plan to go to Cuba, the hijackers decided to head to Pyongyang, North Korea, which they saw as a fitting political stage. With the plane refueled and 106 hostages still aboard, Tamiya was set. But Japan's authorities were still on edge. The released passengers were mostly women, children, and the elderly, the most vulnerable, leaving 99 passengers in continued danger. Once the 23rd child was off the plane, the door slammed shut, trapping the remaining hostages. Captain Haneda, dealing with a map that resembled a junior high geography assignment, found only a note suggesting they tune into a vague radio frequency for guidance. Flying into North Korea meant crossing the DMZ, the heavily restricted demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. This zone is one of the most dangerous no-fly zones in the world, where aircraft risk being shot down without warning. The situation was precarious, with the hijackers' demands creating high stakes for everyone involved. Landing in South Korea. The CIA was on high alert over the hijacking of Flight 351 because 2 Americans, an executive, and a priest were aboard. The plane, heading towards North Korea, approached the DMZ, the tense border between North and South Korea, while the Japanese pilots struggled with a poor map. As if that wasn't enough, the North Koreans were caught off guard, and the DMZ was a dangerous no-fly zone, adding to the risk of an international incident. Despite the chaos, Tamiya, the hijacker leader, was adamant that North Korea posed no threat and was convinced he could win over Kim Il-sung. As the plane entered North Korean airspace, fighter jets appeared, firing warning shots. Panic spread until Pyongyang's control tower finally responded, allowing the plane to land with an escort of fighter jets. At 3:19 p.m., Japan Airlines Flight 351 landed at Mirim Airport in eastern Pyongyang. To the hijackers' delight, they were met with a mix of military personnel and cheering civilians, who saw them as revolutionary heroes. The loudspeaker announced, "This is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We welcome you." Hijackers, convinced they were about to meet Kim Il-sung, were excited by the grand reception. But here's the twist. They were actually in Seoul, South Korea. In a nearby hangar, Japanese and CIA operatives were prepping a rescue mission, posing as North Korean officials to avoid landing in Pyongyang. They had less than an hour to execute their Plan B. South Korean officials scrambled to turn Gimpo Airport into a convincing Pyongyang, hiding all signs of South Korea, dressing police in North Korean uniforms, and staging a welcome party. It was a last-minute effort to pull off this elaborate ruse. As the hijackers, convinced they had arrived in North Korea, prepared to disembark, they were unaware that their revolutionary triumph was about to take a surprising turn. This was just the beginning of their rude awakening. The North Korean twist. As the plane door opens, chaos erupts, with a hijacker shouting, "Close the door, close it." Passengers, thinking they've landed in North Korea, start gathering their things. But confusion strikes when the hijackers notice discrepancies. A foreign Mercedes, unmarked planes, and a black man in a U.S. military uniform, all out of place in North Korea. When they demand proof they're in North Korea and are told it's a military base with a promise of a picture later, their suspicion grows. The lead hijacker questions the bus driver in English, who nervously confirms they're in Pyongyang. Realizing something's off, the hijackers figure out they're actually in South Korea. Authorities offer a deal. Release the passengers, and they'll hand over the Vice Minister of Transport of Japan. Seeing the dire conditions of the hostages, stale air, overflowing toilets, no food, and a sweltering temperature of 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the hijackers agree. Negotiations involve top officials from Japan, South Korea, and possibly the US, due to the high stakes, including American nationals. The discussions are tense. Meanwhile, authorities contemplate risky measures like nighttime raids or drugging the food. The hijackers remain resolute, still aiming to reach North Korea despite the lack of fuel and South Korea's refusal to refuel them. In a surprising turn, North Korea, despite having no diplomatic ties with Japan, offers to ensure the plane's safety through their airspace and treat everyone humanely. This unexpected gesture shifts the crisis dynamics, indicating North Korea's willingness to accept the hijackers. The last negotiations. So, What's next? Japan faces a tough choice. If North Korea is guaranteeing the safety of the plane, it might be best to let the hijackers head there with the Vice Minister of Transport, but not the 99 civilians. The deal is one life for many, and it's easier to manage one person than a large group. The Vice Minister's career is on the line. He needs to offer himself up to save face and ensure he's not blamed for the failure. After 4 days and 3 nights, the hijackers finally agree to release the hostages. Surprisingly, as they leave, many hostages wish them luck on their mission. One passenger later described the hijackers as polite and pleasant, despite the situation. The hijackers even tried to convince the passengers of their beliefs, and at their last meal, they toasted, expressing gratitude and their dedication to their cause. At 2:27 p.m., the plane door opens for the last time. Reporters and military officials watch as the hostages start to disembark. When about half are out, the tarmac falls silent as the Vice Minister prepares to leave. In a tense moment, the Vice Minister and a hijacker step onto the same stair, ensuring neither side can pull a fast one. It's a cautious, dramatic end to a fraught situation. The aftermath and political impact. After landing in Pyongyang, the hijackers were unexpectedly treated to luxury hotel stay, Korean banquets, and fine dining. The Vice Minister and crew returned to Japan after a few days, having to start their plane using a car battery and an air cylinder due to North Korea's refusal to provide proper equipment. The hijackers, however, remained in North Korea, where Japan's attempts to extradite them were blocked. North Korea claimed to protect them from harsh treatment in Japan. Rumors suggest some hijackers are still alive, with Kim Il-sung hinting they married Japanese women and had children in a scheme dubbed Operation Marriage. They were moved to a compound known as Little Japan, where they lived out their days. So what can we learn from this wild story? The hijacking of Japan Airlines Flight 351 wasn't just a bizarre event. It was a snapshot of the turbulent 1970s political climate. It forced Japan to confront radical leftist movements, reshaped international relations, and set new standards for aviation security. The hijackers' extreme actions and unwavering idealism highlight the dangerous paths ideology can lead people down. Thanks for sticking with me through this intense tale. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's craziest moments. And drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were on that flight? Would you have kept your cool or lost it? Let me know. Thanks for watching and see you next time.